So how was everyone's summer?
Francis Ford Coppola is a pretty uneven director. He's made some of the greatest movies ever,
And just as many total failures. Still, there's a remarkable thematic consistency throughout his work.
most of his movies, regardless of genre or tone or even quality, seem to circle around the same central idea: the tension between how things appear and how they really are from the inside. Depending on the individual film, Coppola approaches this central theme by asking at least one of three questions.
How do we navigate between who society says we are and how we see ourselves? Can we ever really know another person?
What is truth? Before we dive into how Coppola's films explore these questions, a couple disclaimers. First of all, in picking which movies I was going to watch for this video, I worried less about seeing the right movies and instead focused on getting a representative sampling from his entire career.
So some of my generalizations may apply less neatly to Coppola's work as a whole, and just happen to fit the movies that I saw.
If that's the case, please let me know down in the comments. Secondly, when we first meet Michael at the beginning of The Godfather, he's the odd man out in the Corleone family. A Dartmouth student, a war veteran, the future husband of Kay Adams, his whole life has pretty much been geared towards assimilating into the broader American culture.
That's my family, Kay. It's not me.
But the truth is, he can't do that. Partly because he loves his father too much to let go of the Italian side of his identity, and partly because his father's enemies wouldn't let him do that anyway. They treat him as just another Italian, as guilty by genetic association.
I thought I got all you guinea hoods locked up. What the hell are you doing here?
So since he can't escape it, he tries to throw himself fully into the Italian part of his identity, but that fails too. By the film's end, Michael is disconnected from both halves of who he is, with no one else to rely on but his own Machiavellian instincts. Beset on all sides by external definitions of who he's supposed to be, he ultimately loses the core of who he was. A similar fate awaits the motorcycle boy in 1983's Rumblefish. A former gang leader, he just wants the freedom to be himself, to define his own life. That struggle is made even more poignant through the film's narrative frame, which interprets everything from the perspective of the motorcycle boy's younger brother. Rusty James waxes nostalgic for the days when the gangs had prestige, and is constantly insisting that when he grows up, he's going to be just like his older brother.
But the motorcycle boy refutes his romantic view of the past.
It wasn't anything.
And the film makes it clear that Rusty James is never going to be like his brother, who is calm and introspective where he is brash and impulsive, and kind when he's just a
Potato.
The fact that Rusty James just doesn't get it only makes the ending of the film more tragic. As the crowd gathers around the motorcycle boy's body, we're left wondering if any of them will understand what just happened, or if they're just going to incorporate his death into the pre-existing mythos of the motorcycle boy. When Rusty James reaches the ocean in the final shot, does he understand the significance of the quest he's just completed? Or is he just going to see this as proof that in the end, he really did get to be just like his brother? It hurts, but I have to acknowledge one other movie that explores this particular paradigm. Jack is a 10-year-old with a genetic disorder that makes him look like Robin Williams. The other kids treat him like a freak. The adults around him expect him to act like the grown-up he appears to be. It's actually a great setup for a movie, but unfortunately, Coppola can't decide if he's making a kids movie with fart jokes or a meditation on age and time, and the resulting tonal inconsistencies just drag the whole thing down. Also, can we talk about how Lou's mom is going to react when she learns she's been rubbing up on a middle schooler? Ugh. Sometimes Coppola's characters have to confront the fact that the people around them are not who they thought they were. In The Outsiders, the adolescents of a small town are divided between greasers, poor kids from broken families, and socias, preppy kids with money. After two greasers rescue some kids from a fire, both gangs are forced to recognize that their rigid caste system doesn't let them see each other for who they really are.
Just would have never believed a greaser could pull something like that.
Greaser didn't have nothing to do with it.
That's a powerful lesson, and in some sequences, The Outsiders presents it well. At other times, it feels like bad live-action Disney. Apocalypse Now explores this idea better. Captain Willard is sent to the jungles of Cambodia to assassinate Walter Kurtz, a rogue colonel. Top brass asserts that Kurtz has gone insane.
Yes, sir. Very much so, sir. Obviously insane.
But as Willard travels through the hellscape of the Vietnam War, he starts to question that assessment. By the time the two meet face to face, Willard understands Kurtz at a level that the generals back in Saigon, and even Kurtz's slavish followers, never could. It's still an imperfect understanding, filtered through Willard's own consciousness, but it's a step closer to the truth. The conversation follows surveillance expert Harry Call as he wraps up an assignment. He seems detached and uninterested in the lives of other people.
This is my business.
But as he obsessively re-listens to the tapes, Harry begins to realize that nothing is what it seems. Gradually, we start to realize that the same is true for Harry's personal life. By the film's end, the two worlds collide, but not in the way that Harry or the audience expects. The final twist leaves Harry's world in shambles, consumed by paranoia. In the first half of Tucker, the Man in His Dream, Preston Tucker sells the idea of his new car through advertising and by showing off a prototype that, in fact, doesn't run. There is no car, really, but these gimmicks convince investors and the government that the Tucker Corporation is viable. But in the film's second half, stories leak about the failed prototype. Then the SEC charges Tucker with defrauding his investors. It's the supreme irony. Now that he has the cars, no one believes they exist. Sometimes it's not Coppola's characters, but the audience who must determine what's real. Youth Without Youth culminates in an apparent time loop. Dominic Mattei is transported 40 years into the past, before the event which set the story in motion. Or is he? Has most of the film been only the dream of a lonely, failed scholar near the end of his life? Was Veronica actually possessed by her past lives? Or just mentally ill? Was Dominic's other only in his mind? And if that's the case, then how could Veronica see him? These questions are an interesting intellectual exercise. The movie itself, though, is kind of a slog. Much of Youth Without Youth reminds me of the reincarnation, love across time bullshit that Coppola shoved into his 1992 adaptation of Dracula, but with more tape recorders. And no Anthony Hopkins. Yeah, me too, lady. Me too. TWIX tells the story of Hall Baltimore, an alcoholic writer trying to solve a murder through a series of dreams and turn it into a book before his wife sells his priceless copy of Leaves of Grass. I'm not kidding.
The fog on the lake was like a straight edge razor.
As the story unfolds, it becomes almost impossible to tell what's real, what's a dream, and what's just part of Baltimore's manuscript. For one thing, the timeline is all over the place. V is either the dead girl in the morgue in the present day, or a victim of a 1955 serial killer, or the wife of Edgar Allan Poe who died in 1847, and or all three and a vampire? Or something? And the ending just makes things more complicated. We cut abruptly to Hall's publisher, who congratulates him on the new manuscript. Does that mean that most of the movie has been Hall's novel, not his real experiences? Or did all of it happen, and Hall is passing it off as fiction, and might be a vampire himself? Or did some parts really happen, and some are Hall's invention? An ending title card suggests that Bobby LaGrange's death, at least, was real. But how much of the scene where his body is found actually occurred? Then there's the town landmark, a clock tower with 7 faces that all read different times. Everybody references it, and a key sequence takes place inside that tower. But then, in his final dream, Hall talks about his daughter's fatal boating accident. See, he was supposed to have gone with her, but he was drunk, and he set his alarm for the wrong time. This detail suggests that the clock tower symbolizes Hall's guilt over her death and isn't a real building. But if that's so, did the events involving the tower never happen? What other locations in the town are fictitious? And at what point does the true story of Hall Baltimore's book tour end and the fiction begin? One might point to the first dream sequence, which is preceded by a bizarre camera tilt, but another possibility presents itself. The film opens with voiceover narration, which introduces us to the town, including the possibly fictional clock tower, and to Hall Baltimore. But after this setup, the narration drops out and never returns.
Excuse me, do you know where the bookstore is?
It's almost like when you first start reading a book and the narrative voice kind of sucks you in, and then it fades into the background as you're drawn into the story. Could the entire movie be Hall's manuscript, at least up to his meeting with Sam? That would explain the clunky dialogue, the bad acting, and the sometimes incoherent narrative. I mean, what else would you expect from the
bargain basement Stephen King?
But this also opens a massive can of worms. Did Hall really visit Swan Valley? What happened to Bobby LaGrange? Who was the dead girl? And if all of that was made up, what are we supposed to do with that final title card, which includes not only information about Bobby's death, but also comments on the sales of Hall's book? Eventually, all these questions sort of gobble their own tails, dissolving any attempts at definitive truth.
On a whale's ass? No.
Or maybe it's just a really bad movie. What do you guys think?
She wore taffeta.
Hey Film Dorks, I hope you enjoyed this video. Coppola really is an interesting filmmaker for me because on the one hand he has made some of the greatest movies of all time, and yet he's also responsible for some truly fascinating train wrecks.
What's the matter with you?
If you're curious, here are the movies I've watched in preparation for the video, and also a new rating system that I thought I'd play around with. What are your favorite Coppola films? Also, what are your thoughts of the Bram Stoker's Dracula movie? I mean, am I crazy for thinking it's really terrible? Or do I deserve to be impaled for that? Let me know in the comments down below. I hope everybody's safe, happy, and well. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you on the flip side.
Yeah, she was in great pain. Then we cut off her head and drove a stake to her heart and burned it, and then she found peace.
Then... Gotta go.